Good morning. Great to see you all today. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about the consumer experience. Obviously, I would acknowledge for businesses, often if you're getting consumer on the phone, you're like, oh no, this is my worst nightmare. Please don't talk to me. But we are, also really about trying to work with business and help empower you to understand the consumer experience. So a little bit about us as an organisation, if you're not familiar with us. We've been around for more than 60 years. We are member funded. You may know us for testing toasters and vacuum cleaners and things like that. But we are also about our advocacy and investigations. So that's really about empowering consumers and ensuring that they have a fair marketplace, whether that's competition in the supermarket sector, that they can buy products that are actually going to go the distance and last. So, we're really kind of looking at the entire consumer experience and trying to make it better for them. We also have a comparison site, Power Switch, which I'd encourage you to check out. At the moment, you can save around $500 by switching providers, so it's a great time to be switching. So we do a lot of research. Every year we talk to more than 30,000 New Zealanders to get an insight into where they're at and how they're feeling. And a lot of that is around consumer behaviour and what they're thinking when they go out there to go shopping and to understand, what their concerns are. We look at everything from how much money do they have saved, how do they feel about property, how do they feel about the environment. We're really trying to get a deep understanding of where they're sitting. And we also collect our information in a range of different ways. So obviously we have our members and supporters, and that's around 171,000 New Zealanders who are really engaged in the issues that we're looking at. We have about 3.5 million people come to the website each year, 60,000 social media followers, 31,000 mag readers, and we undertake a lot of nationally representative research to make sure that we're not just in an echo chamber talking to people who love us. We want to hear from everyone. So you kind of have to have your head in the sand if you hadn't noticed that in the last 2 to 3 years there have been massive changes happening, and the way shoppers and consumers are feeling is really changing. So obviously one thing that's up there is deceptive marketing. I think that there's been a real plummet in trust from people, and cost of living has a major part of this. People are feeling really stressed, they're strained. There's a lot less money coming in. They're also worried about climate change. You turn the news on, it's not a great picture. So all of this is kind of creating this general cloud of negativity, which is, making it a much harder place to live and exist. You can see that things like housing, crime are up there as well. Sorry, I didn't mean for this talk to be so depressing. There will be some nice things somewhere along the way. But, overall, the general feeling is not a great one. And I think that's something to be mindful of when marketing, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So just, here's a sample of some headlines over the past few years. One thing about this change in our socioeconomic sort of outlook is that people are being really mindful when they're shopping. They're being a lot more considered, and that comes down to two different reasons. It comes down to, I have less money, but it also comes down to the world is falling apart and there are climate implications, so I'm going to take a lot more time to think about what I am actually buying. So the thing that we're seeing, like in the last year, we've seen food prices increase by 12%. So fruit and vegetable have gone up 25% in a year. Rent is going up a bit. It's kind of different areas, different amounts. So on average, $10. But you look at some areas like Manawatu, Whanganui, it's going up 45. So you are finding in different areas of New Zealand, people are experiencing different pockets of housing increasing and volatility there. And electricity, retailers, essential services, that's also going up a lot as well. So people are feeling like the things that they have to buy, the things that they don't actually have the opportunity to sort of opt out of, those prices are going up a lot. So there's the difference in the last 2 years in terms of the consumer experience and where those concerns lie is that 2 years ago, people were sort of more worried about things that were sitting a little bit further out in the future. So they might be worried about, oh, you know, how am I going to pay for education costs for my child, or healthcare expenses that might be looming, maybe mortgage and rent, trying to cover that. But what we're actually seeing now, 2 years later, is that the financial concerns have really shifted into the here and now. So can I pay for rent? Can I pay for a mortgage? Can I afford for groceries? And can I stay on top of my personal debt? Because maybe I'm in a cycle where every single month I'm a little bit in the red, and so I'm having to borrow a little bit more, and so that's accumulating, and that's a stress. So people are really just focused and shifting down into today and this week. And we actually looked at renters, and for renters, their number one financial concern was food. So even beyond having a roof over their head, they just need to be able to pay for food to get through the day. So obviously no one's wages are going up at the extent that the prices are escalating. So what that means is there is this squeeze. People are having to take things out of the budget and think about where they can make trimmings. And then that is sort of leading to this anxiety. So 1 in 5 New Zealanders have no savings. I think 1 in 3 have less than $1,000 in the bank. And about half the population is feeling a bit anxious about how much savings is set aside. Gosh, I did not realise how bleak this talk was when I started doing it. I'm like, maybe you guys need to open the bar or something, because, sorry. So the thing for shoppers now is that above everything else, it's price competition. Everyone is like, if they are thinking about all the different factors, price competitiveness is the number one thing. But coming after that is actually sustainability. That's the number 2 thing that people take into consideration when they're shopping. And then after that, it's locality. So can I support a New Zealand business? What can I do to help other to help my community? And I think that a lot of people recognise, like, yes, I'm a consumer, but it's really hard for New Zealand businesses out there. And so there is that community spirit and that feeling of wanting to help. People are also really sales and bargain orientated. So love a sale, love a bargain. I'm going to put my consumer hat on and say, like, please make sure that the sale is meaningful and true and all of that. But people love that. And then there's the lipstick effect, which is something that was talked about in the Depression. Small pleasures from small purchases. Sorry, I know it says big on the screen, but it's like, I cannot go to Fiji this year and I cannot buy a new laptop, but maybe I can do something small for myself to just uplift. And that could be, so for the fast moving consumer goods people out there, this is sort of an area where if you can sell people everyday luxury and something that's going to uplift them a little bit and bring joy into their lives, that's a great offering to people right now, because they want that escapism. And I think escapism is a huge thing. So when I'm half Indian, and I have gone to India a lot when I was a kid, and I remember we would go to the cinema, and the movie experiences were wild, because there was just like, everyone was there, and people would be like yelling at the screen and just getting so involved and engaged. And I said to my mum, like, what is this? This is really weird. Because in New Zealand, we all just sit politely and watch the movie, and no one's whooping and doing this stuff. And she said to me, it's escapism. Look at people's lives. It's so hard. So they just want to just get out of their heads and the worries that they have for today and go somewhere else. And I think that really plays into that little everyday luxury thing and giving people some respite. So if you're looking at 2 years ago, what we had was that we had a really big chunk of New Zealand that was sitting in this like middle class. You might be comfortable, you could afford these extras, but what has happened in the last 2 years is that you've got this slide into lower income comparatively. If you're looking at when you've paid for everything at the end of the week, how much you actually have left. And what that also means for people is that they are, for the first time, facing vulnerability and actually not knowing how to do that. So when you're thinking about things like buy now, pay later, like 1 in 4 people have that. Like the number of people that are putting their purchases on buy now, pay later and then paying for that buy now, pay later with a credit card, there is this increased vulnerability to debt. So that's, I just think, something to be really mindful of, that, you know, with people purchasing, it is a lot harder. If we're looking at the age groups that are most affected, it's 18 to 29-year-olds and 40 to 49-year-olds. If we're looking geographically at who is doing it the hardest, it's Aucklanders. So there you go. And then if we're looking at which ethnic group is finding it the hardest, it's Pacifica. And yeah, 1 in 10 are going into the red, and about 28% are feeling like their standard of living has declined. And as I was mentioning, about 35% of buy now, pay later users are putting it on a credit card. So if you look at you know, issues over the last few years, you can see that cost of living, it was like really down there and it's kind of skyrocketed up, and there are other things that have taken a bit of a slide. So 2 years ago we were really worried about COVID, we were worried about health, and that sort of plummeted. Crime is coming up there, climate change is sort of flatlining, and housing, I think we were in that period where everything was like really overinflated and it was a frenzy, and so people were really stressed about that. So if we're looking at the highs and lows, it's really about my spending ability has eroded, and now I'm going to change my spending habits. So I think about 65% of people have said in the next year, I really intend to change the way in which I spend. And that can mean shifting markets, and what once worked in terms of marketing may not work anymore. So if you have the ability to, you know, to do any research or to tap in with your customer base and get an understanding of where they're at, I think that's a really great thing to do, because it's like what once worked may not be the case anymore, and that can be a really hard thing, particularly if you've got a great product and you're like, is it me? Am I doing something? But it's actually more about this environment. So I think it really does pay to remember that. So one thing is about trust. So across the board, trust has declined. Again, like, don't take it personally. It's this environment out there. People are really grumpy with retailers, and I think something to be mindful of is that with bigger businesses, the people are way grumpier. And I think this is when you are seeing in the media these reports of profits, insane profits. It's really rubbing the wrong way, which is kind of understandable. So, you know, Air New Zealand reporting a $231 million year of profits when there's all these flight delays and customer relations problems. The banks, energy companies, also really high, and these are essential services as well, like people can't avoid getting around this. And obviously the supermarkets, there was the Commerce Commission study which said that there were excessive profits and lack of competition, and sort of how is this being addressed. So I think that if you are a bigger business and you are seen to be making more money, you might want to think around the optics of this. And the other thing that our research has shown, when we're looking at customer satisfaction of big retailers, big players versus smaller challengers coming in, the customers are happier with the challengers, and there's more innovation coming in from these smaller companies that are actually pushing the bigger companies to do better on all fronts. So just something to think about on that front. So climate change, obviously we're all aware of it. We've had the floods and in Auckland and the cyclone, and I think this is the first time that we've really felt it on our back door. I'm a COVID returnee. I came in 3 days before managed isolation, but I was in Sydney for the bushfires. I remember sitting at my child's end of year daycare party, and the sky was red and there was ash falling from the sky, and it was very like, oh, this feels like end of days. This is weird. And I think for New Zealand, this was a thing for us this year where we actually climate change was sort of, it was over there and we were aware of it, but now it's on our back door. And I think that people are really mindful of that. And so New Zealanders are actually losing a bit of faith in what our local government and councils can do. And that is really pivoting the purchasing behaviour, where people are saying that they want to shop sustainably. I think when you look at concern, obviously people are really concerned about the world. New Zealand, it's not feeling so great, but people are sort of, when they're thinking about their regions or their home and community, people have felt that it's less of an imminent threat, but that threat is growing. So I guess when you think about sustainability, like I don't know if any of you guys purchase sustainability. I know I try to, but when you're actually looking at what's out there, how are you making those decisions? I think that for me, particularly if I'm at the supermarket with my kids, I'm like, there's some brown cardboard that says eco, there's like a little forest label there. I'm really trying to just like get them away from the chop-chops and make quick decisions. And so those are social cues to me about, making a purchasing choice. But I think we need to be really careful with sustainability, particularly in marketing, because right now in New Zealand, it is a little bit of a wild west, and it is possible that clampdowns could be coming. So if you look at the UK, Australia, and the EU, the regulators there have done market analysis and have found that about 30 to 50% of sustainable claims that were out there in the market were actually like false or unsubstantiated, and there's been a lot of clampdown on that. So that could mean banning words like eco or sustainability, or things that could allude to marketing, like brown packaging and that type of thing. So right now in New Zealand, like at Consumer, we just went to the supermarket and picked up a basket full of sustainable goods, and we found that pretty much all of them were greenwashed. So there is an ability currently in this marketplace to be really bold with what you're doing in terms of greenwashing or sustainability. And I think that puts businesses in a really hard position, because if all of your competitors are doing it, they have a market advantage. They are able to go out there and people will love their claims and buy them. And if you don't do it, then you're not part of the game. But are you misleading people? Are you actually able to substantiate what you're saying? So it's just something to be mindful of. So I would say, if in doubt, keep it out. I'm so sorry if this is one of your brands up on the big screen. So here are some examples. So I'd say EarthSmart. What does that mean? EarthSmart TM. These are wipes that are biodegradable, but they are used to wipe babies' bums, and you cannot put things like wheeze or faeces in a compost, so they go in the bin. So is there any point saying they're compostable? Like, that's not really best practice. It's kind of meaningless, and the EarthSmart term means nothing as well. Mrs. Rogers, that has a laid-up label that the company has created themselves. So again, kind of looks like greenwashing. We asked Airwick about Botanica about their nature-inspired room spray, and they said that they considered the environment when choosing ingredients. So I was like, what does that even mean? And then the Glad to be Green ocean-bound plastic, the criteria around that was that you had to be collecting this plastic for 50 kilometres from a shoreline. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this is plastic that's come from the ocean, and then this is still a single-use plastic that will end up in the bin. So, and the really fruity nuggets paper pouches also contained plastic. So this is just examples to you about how rife it is out there. The Commerce Commission actually has amazing guidelines for how to if you're marketing, if you're thinking about putting claims out to audiences, the guidelines for what you can and can't do. And the thing about sustainability and green claims is that marketing is kind of the final stop. before it goes out into the shelves. So really, as marketers, you are the gatekeepers for, what is legit out there and what is not. Overseas, it's been interesting. So obviously, there's been a lot more investigation into this. There's clearer stats on how much is being said in terms of sustainability. But what's actually happening is it's sort of entering a new phase where companies have sort of become immobilised. They're so afraid of being seen to be greenwashing that they're actually not communicating about their journey and their sustainability because they're so afraid of being cancelled or what could come next or a misstep. So I think that if you are trying to find this balance, it sounds really cheesy, but actually being vulnerable and open about your journey in terms of sustainability, even if you're making mistakes or you're learning things along the way, is a perfectly acceptable thing, and I think that your community would really appreciate it. I know that the hard thing for a lot of people is that you might be a small to medium business and you don't have an in-house sustainability expert, you don't have the resources, and we have actually really seen this with a look into the fashion industry, some quite big labels that you would imagine would know a lot, who were actually really confused about their certification and were trying to do the right thing, but then were actually misleading shoppers, and that's a hard place to be. So on that note, I would say, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'll be here at the morning tea as well, but at Consumer, we are actually really keen to work with you guys, to work with business, and to help you on your journey. So do feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. I won't cancel you, I promise. So yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. Cheers.